All right, so just to start off, can you give a brief introduction of who you are and your background as an artist?
Sure. So my name is Nazanin Noroozi. I am a painter, printmaker, filmmaker. I make mixed media work. I come from a painting background. I use a lot of printmaking techniques, although I'm not a traditional printmaker in that sense. And I usually work with archives, meaning images that I either take or get from family albums from family and friends or people that are close to me, or just the general archive that exists in the outside world. So my work is very much photographic based. It usually starts with a photograph or like a little film or a Super 8 recently, and then it takes from there. So I'm really interested in the ideas of, like manipulating archives and adding my own agency, etc.
Cool. That was actually one of the questions is are you drawn to specific mediums or concepts in your work? So I did see a lot of kind of like layering. And I read that it was to kind of create this feeling of like not displacement, but like home, like kind of, exploring the idea of home. Um,
Exactly.
can you
Yeah.
speak a little bit more about that and how you put your I guess like pieces together? Like what's the process behind it?
Right. So yeah, I think in general, what I'm really interested in overall, and I think it has been shifting lately, but so far it has been like that I'm really interested in like, really mundane moments of everyday life. My works are usually about, I used to like take snapshots of the gatherings with my close friends when I still lived in Iran back home, with just like a regular gathering that every person in their 20s have, hanging out with friends and stuff. And then I kind of moved to these images of the same friends, but with their birthdays when they were kids. And that was kind of the beginning of my interest in archives, because I feel like, when you look at family albums, they're usually, most of the time, there are about these just regular moments, very, very mundane moments that everyone has had them in their lives. But I feel like they reveal something about our existence and our lives that I'm very interested in. When you're looking at these images, it's impossible not to think about time. When you think about time that is past, there are all these questions about, like nostalgia, melancholia, I don't know, longing, all these kind of things. Some of these concepts are things that I try to stay away from, and some of them are the ones that I actually like to question and like play with, and some have some kind of an interaction. So I think it's like kind of easy to think that, oh, if someone is dealing with, archives, they're necessarily, or they're usually dealing with nostalgia, which is one of the themes in my work. But I try to have like a critical point of view towards it as much as I can.
Hmm.
And then the process of my work usually begins with those. I either choose one of these images. I can't explain what draws me into one photograph. But something in it does. I'm usually interested in things that are less posed, and kind of mostly like failures, like people have odd faces or they don't have a perfect composition, etc., like that. So I usually begin with those, and then I manipulate them either manually or digitally. I usually print them. Since I use a lot of printmaking, but I'm not a traditional printmaker, I usually never edition my work, So either I use different techniques, and all of them are like one of a kind, and I build all these layers on top of each other. My kind of more recent pieces, the two films that I have made so far, and I'm actually in the process of making the third one, are stop motion handmade films that are based on Super 8 movies that my father took in the late 70s, early 80s, in Iran. And when I found them, I always knew that I am going to make a film or moving images, but I was like too scared because I was a painter. I had no idea how to make these things happen. When I found those Super 8s, I was like, okay, that is it. I have to like do something with them. So I started, I digitized them first of all, and then I take screenshots or still frames of these, like a 40-minute something footage. And I print them out and I paint on every single frame. And then I take a picture again and zip them together. So it's a very labor intensive process. It's very, very primitive. I don't think any animator in 21st century uses this system. But for me, it's like making 600, 700 little paintings technically. And that's how I do that. I try to, work with the narrative and create a new one as I am making these moving images.
Wow, that sounds awesome. Can you also speak on what your educational journey has been like from Iran to the US and how that has had an impact on your artistic approach?
Yes. So I actually came to the United States to go to art school. I went to Pratt and I got my MFA in painting and drawing. Before that, I had a bachelor's degree in painting in Iran and also an MFA in art history. But that's how or why I actually came here. I think it really, it definitely had a huge impact. I came to New York, which was a dream. I think maybe I had some romanticized ideas about New York and the art scene, but nevertheless, it was like really great. And coming to Pratt was very interesting because first of all, it's a very different educational system. But I was also able to explore and experiment a lot of things that we either didn't have the equipment back home or it was difficult. One of the great things about this country is that everything is plenty. So especially with printmaking, that few years before coming to the US, I knew that this is something that I want to pursue, but going to art school here actually made it possible for me to learn all of these things and experiment as much as I can.
So did the idea of kind of like layering and images and stuff, was that a concept that you were already exploring when you were in Iran and you just kind of brought that over, like continued exploring it here?
Yeah. Generally, I can say that. I think my work has changed in terms of like, it is definitely less personal. I don't know whether it's the fact that I've been living outside of my homeland for a long time, or just because I'm growing older. I'm getting older, and maybe my point of view is like getting more inclusive, or I don't know, like expanded. But yes, definitely. I feel like my work now it is about the ideas of home, but in a much universal sense, because I really think that we citizens of the contemporary world really don't belong no matter where we live. And that has been an experience for me both back home and here. I never really felt like I belong, which is a good thing. I really don't mean it as like a sad situation. I try to embrace it. And I think this hybridity is something that I'm interested in my work as well, with the layering and, moving back and forth between digital and manual painting and work on paper, transient moments of a film, or like, just actual works on paper that gets on the wall, gets shown on the wall.
Another question I had is, do you consider yourself a diasporic artist? And how does that experience reflect in your work, if at all?
I don't know. Probably yes. I think especially with the themes of my work, since it is about the ideas of loss and longing and instability, actually much more lately, probably it has something to do with diaspora. Do I think of myself as a diasporic artist? Yes, but do I want to be labeled as that, or like show my work in that context. And I don't think so. So it's like it's a very fine line, especially with, I think, some of us artists that our work is about back home, or there are elements that they depict a certain geographic, historical point of view. It's a very, very fine line to be able to talk about those things, but not be considered as just, like a Middle Eastern Iranian women artist, for example, which is a label that it is accurate in many ways, but it brings a lot of stereotypes and codes that I'd like to stay away from.
Yeah, and that's something I've heard a lot from other artists actually that I've spoken with too. It's kind of, and I can definitely relate to that. It's kind of the idea of being able to create with like, kind of like personal experiences, but not having to be boxed into that, which I think is definitely fair. And so the next question is actually about the pieces. So can you speak on your creative approach and creative process behind your pieces that are going to be featured in the exhibition? So the first one, Untitled, number 15.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so those are, I actually did a series of those untitles, which are larger cyanotypes on mulberry paper. I am actually very interested in the process, and my work is very process driven. So those images are still frames from these Super 8s. They're enlarged, they're big. Super 8s really don't have good quality. So everything is very pixelated. It's very blurry. And I've been really drawn into that blue of cyanotype, which is like, it's a blessing and a curse, because, you love it and you hate it at the same time. So cyanotype are these, old photographic technique from a 19th century. They're used in crafts a lot, actually, but they are non-silver. It is a non-silver photographic process. And you expose your light sensitive material to UV light, or the light with the sun, and then you wash it in water and you get an image. So the process is very interesting. Those are, and you always get that kind of a blue. It's like hence the name cyanotype. That's like, you get that cyan blue. So those are parts of those films of the Super 8s, and they are collaged with elements of early computer games that I also deal with a lot in my work, especially in the films. As I'm thinking, about the 80s, where these films were shot, I actually got really interested in the aesthetics of the early computer games. Which happened in the 80s. The 80s were the first times that we had, people had computer games, or they had computers at home, and then you had these computer games. The aesthetics of them is really, really interesting. They're very raw. They're very different from what we know today as of computer games. It's pixelated, it's geometric, it's very, very primitive, but then it has this really raw violence that I was really interested in. And ironically, they are the very first person shooting games as well. So in actually two of the works that you will have in that exhibition, the Death Star and the Untitled number 15, those images of the Super 8s are juxtaposed with the elements of the computer games. The Death Star actually comes from the Atari game with the Star Wars. I've never seen Star Wars and I've never been a gamer, but I know a lot about it. And there is something I've been trying to find out a way to, put these two very opposite aesthetics and sentiments next to each other, something that is as romantic and as elusive as like late analog imagery, like Super 8s, or printmaking, that everything is like kind of fragile, with the kind of a raw, tense computer games graphics. And those are the things that you've seen in two of those works. The third one, Study for Pearl, is also another screenshot of one of the films that I made, but it's enlarged. It's also a cyanotype with layers of silk screening with, you know, all these mark makings that I make. So as I'm painting on these frames, and as I'm thinking about the violence of the computer games, as I'm thinking about the war and the 80s, you know, all these kind of things, I also make these expressive, you know, mark makings. And that's what you see in those works.
Oh, thank you for that. So this is another question. The title of the exhibition is Our Tears Are Sweet, Our Laughter Venomous, a quote from Simin Babahani. Is the quote a sentiment that you share at all? And how does this poetry fit into the multiple roles that you are asked to take on?
It's so interesting because I actually couldn't find that poem in Farsi, and I was interested in, like, you know, finding out like which one are we talking about, and I couldn't find it. I know if I do more research, I'll probably be able to find that. Yes, well, at first, when I first saw just the title, I was like, well, this seems to be a little romantic, and I'm not quite sure if this is something that I relate to. But when I read the poem, all of it, I actually realized that this is about war, and it was interesting because my work is not about war, but there are elements, or like at least these two films were shot when the war was happening. So it was something that I actually found it interesting. But to be quite frank, I haven't thought like more in depth about like the relationship of that title to my general body of work.
This is just me being curious, but is poetry something that you would ever, I guess, consider like incorporating into like the images and the layering and the different mediums that you kind of use?
Right. I don't think so. Although I love poetry, and I hate to like stereotype, but as Persians or as Iranians, we grew up with, you know, poetry. Like literature is really, really a big part of the culture, much more than visual arts. So I think like generally, if you talk to an average person, a cab driver, you know, a construction worker, they would be able to recite like sonnets of Hafiz, or like, you know, poetry especially is really big part of the culture. And because of that, it actually has, again, it's a blessing and a curse, because it can be used in a kitschy way, and it can be used in a very impactful way. At this moment, right now where I'm standing, I don't think so. But of course, I can't say like, you know, in 15 years, maybe things completely change. Generally, I think I like to, because my work has those tendencies, it's very layer based, it is about people, it's about the time past, and it is kind of fragile and delicate enough. And I kind of don't want to make it even more delicate. And I think poetry does that. So that's why right now I'm kind of staying away from it.
So kind of like you were saying with the video games and the I guess like the raw violence and stuff, it kind of like balances it out, because
I hope it does. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And then what is it that you hope viewers take away from your work?
Oh, well. Okay, I'm gonna say this. I don't know if it's a good thing to say it, like in a recorded interview. You decide if you want to keep it or if you want to get rid of it. I always feel like I want to talk about some kind of a heaviness that it's not easy to explain with words, or maybe I don't know how to do it. That's why I'm a visual artist, not a writer. I always think that, you know, in an ideal situation, when I have a solo exhibition, when people are able to look at the films and the works on paper, my ideal situation is that, like, you know, people visiting that exhibition, and when they leave, I want one of them to tell their friends that I suddenly feel really blue and I don't know why. That's what I really, and I know it's like sadistic probably to want people feel like heavy and kind of like sad or blue. But that is what I want them to like, maybe take. But I'm also one of those, I know some artists are very strict about the type of a meaning that they want to leave their work. They're very specific about about the message that they're conveying. I'm more, because I'm process-based and I do my work, I'm more like, I want them to look at these things and whatever they take is fine. This is only my point of view and I'm not going to enforce it. And I personally think, of course, I don't insist on this personal opinion, but I personally think the works that are more ambiguous have more room for interpretation and connection. Because when you have this very specific kind of a message that you want people to get, then it's just your point of view. And I feel like, masterpieces in art history and everything, they always leave room for new interpretations, even centuries later. So ideally, I can do that as well.
Yeah, and I think, because I think when I looked at your art, it reminded me a lot of, my parents immigrated from Mexico, and I have like these weird like fragments of memories from like back home. And I've talked about this with my brother actually, about not knowing what's a memory and what's kind of been made in your mind from like, your family or your parents telling you stories. So it becomes this weird like concept of, is this real or not? And that's something that really like hit for me when I saw your art, because it reminded me of like, kind of like you were saying, like it made me feel kind of like sad, because I was like, the colors and like the layered images and kind of like that nostalgic of like, home,
Right.
but also in a weird way like comforting, and the idea of home, like I think it is very kind of juxtaposed.
I mean, I really think sometimes that, this feeling that nothing is safe, nothing is kind of stable, and everything can change like in a matter of seconds, for all the reasons that is completely outside of your power, is something that I'm interested in. And actually, to be honest, I feel like, because I remember before the pandemic, or the year before, 2 years before, when I talked to people about this, they mostly thought that, oh, this is an experience of the developing countries because of all of the political turmoils, whether it's like South America, Central America, Middle East, I don't know, like African countries, countries that they have had a lot of upheavals socially and politically. They never thought that this could apply to like the Western world or to the developed world. But I feel like since last year, when the pandemic happened and something as simple as having a birthday party for your kid was impossible for the reasons that are completely outside of your power, maybe people are more understanding about the concept that I am interested in, that a lot of things, this idea of that, and that's why I think like home really doesn't exist regardless of where we live, if we are immigrants or not. It's because of our contemporary world that safety that we're thinking about, it doesn't exist at all. And maybe we all have these kind of romantic ideas about like, a safe place that we call it home. So these are the things that I'm kind of interested in, and hopefully it can come out from the work somehow.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point actually too with COVID. Like I heard that a lot with people, and actually my parents were saying that, how hopefully like more people who were like non-immigrants would be able to relate to that feeling of like, I guess like kind of questioning like what is home, because I did hear that a lot, from friends and stuff, like, oh, I can't see my family, or I can't have this celebration. And it really made a lot of people question like their own identity, I thought, which was really, really cool. And I think that'll be a really cool added layer to when people see your art now. So, and so last question. As an Iranian woman artist working in the US, are there any additional thoughts you would like to share in reflection of this experience?
Not really. I think we talked about it. I mean, I think identity is a multi-layered phenomenon. There are so many things that one person is. Your nationality, your sexual orientation, your gender, your sex. All of these things are just some aspects of it. So I feel like there are certain boxes that people think of when they think of a Middle Eastern woman artist. I think some of them are legitimate, and those questions, some of them are legitimate, and I would have had similar questions as well. I'm pretty sure that I have some stereotypical questions of people from cultures that I don't know much about as well. But it's hard to operate in a world, especially the art world, that only wants certain things from you. And this is one of the biggest questions that I have in my career, that how can I talk about my lived experience, but make it more appealing and universal, and don't be that Iranian woman artist. And this is just me. I'm pretty sure many people would feel comfortable with that, definition, because their work is about that. I want my work to be about many other things, but usually it is, it's hard to operate. That's what I can say.
Cool. Yeah, so that's all the questions. Let me